Yali Madad, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on understanding and navigating dementia. My name is Saima Rajabali, and I serve as the National Executive Manager for Care for the Elderly portfolio. This webinar marks the official launch of the introduction and implementation of programming, education, and awareness on dementia to support our Jamat living with dementia and their caregivers. Dementia is on the rise in Canada and in our Jamat. Different cultures engage with the dementia process differently, and there is a need to ensure the rights, engagement, and inclusion of people living with dementia and their caregivers are respected and preserved in all aspects of their community life, including spiritual, social, and emotional. For this reason, we will be implementing programming, education, and awareness campaigns to provide support to the Jamat in understanding dementia, reducing stigma, and providing support in their journeys as they navigate dementia. It is my pleasure to be moderating today's webinar alongside our wonderful panelists. In today's webinar, we will learn about what dementia is, its risk factors, and the state of dementia in Canada. We will also learn about supports and resources available, and we will hear lived experiences of two caregivers who care for their parents living with dementia. To start us off, I'd like to invite Kahir Lalji, member for Care for the Elderly, Council for Canada, to share his opening remarks. Welcome, Kahir.
Ya Ali Madad. On behalf of the Council for Canada, I am delighted today to launch our dementia strategy to support and work with those in our Jamat living with dementia, their family, their friends, and their caregivers. This is such an important initiative. We know that dementia is prevalent and will continue to rise, and that is no different for our Jamat. We see it, and we know that there are families living with dementia and supporting loved ones with dementia. I want to acknowledge all of our partners at the Alzheimer Society and all of those that will be sharing their life experiences as caregivers. And I am sure many of you will see yourselves as caregivers and will resonate with the story shared today, including myself. My family and I had the honor of caring for our loved one with dementia. And it is so important that we connect and rely on each other for support. Dementia is indiscriminate, regardless of your culture, regardless where you live, regardless what language you speak, regardless of what gender you may be. And it is so important for us to realize that there are supports available, that there are resources available, and that we are here for you. Please reach out. You will hear from the Alzheimer Society of British Columbia and Ontario. You will hear about members of our Jamat who have and are currently providing care to loved ones, which is similar to many experiences Jamats across the country are facing every day. All of our life situations are different. All of the way we face this disease will be different. But know that you are not alone. We invite you to reflect on the conversation today. We invite you to reach out. This is the first part of a number of initiatives that will be available for the Jamat in the coming months and years. We also know that sometimes talking about this can be challenging, it can be tricky. This is not easy. And that's even more important. And that is even why it's more important for us to come together to support each other. The Jamat helping the Jamat. I want to once again acknowledge the organizers. I want to organize those that will be sharing their experiences. And I want to acknowledge our partners that have come together to make sure that those that need and require the support have that available. If you are struggling with dementia, if you are supporting a loved one with dementia and need support, if you know someone in the Jamat that may be struggling with dementia, please reach out to the access line at access@iicanada.net, access@iicanada.net. This contact information will be on a slide at the end of this webinar. Once again, thank you to everyone that has come together, and for all of our Jamaat living with dementia and those that are supporting those with dementia, our hats off to you. This is not easy, but we are here for you.
Thank you, Kahir, for your warm welcome and setting the stage for today's webinar. It is now my pleasure to introduce Cathy Barrick and Jennifer Lyle. Cathy Barrick is the Chief Executive Officer of Alzheimer Society of Ontario. Cathy leads with enthusiasm, creativity, and a drive to create impact within the not-for-profit sector. Cathy drives innovation through fundraising and program development. Cathy has worked in the not-for-profit sector from the start, beginning her career as a gerontological social worker. Her degrees in gerontology, social work, and sociology have followed Cathy to develop a clinical practice supporting individuals, couples, and families address issues throughout their lives. Cathy has a particular interest in supporting seniors and their families as they face a diagnosis of dementia. Jennifer Lyle is the Chief Executive Officer of the Alzheimer Society of B.C. Prior to joining the Alzheimer Society of B.C., she was the founding CEO of BC's Continuing Care Workplace Safety Association, Safe Care BC. Jen has also previously worked in a dual role as a healthcare practitioner and the Director of Operations for a Burnaby-based rehabilitation organization, and has collaborated on research looking at the impact of design on people living with dementia. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Simon Fraser University and a Master of Health Administration from the University of British Columbia. Today, they will cover several topics, including what is dementia, its risk factors, management, and supports and resources available. Welcome, Cathy and Jen. We are very happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Sima, for the wonderful welcome. And as you mentioned, I'm here from the Alzheimer Society of Ontario, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jen Lyle, who is from the Alzheimer Society of BC. We're thrilled to be here and given the opportunity to speak and share more about dementia and what it means for our society and our communities, but also about the Alzheimer Society and how we can support. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This land is also part of the Dish with One Spoon territory, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We honor the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples in this area and express our gratitude for their stewardship of the land throughout the ages. And I'm going to turn it over to Jen, who's coming to us from BC.
Thank you, Cathy. And I'd like to also acknowledge that I'm joining you here today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And similarly to Cathy, I'm grateful for their ongoing stewardship and their guidance in the ongoing continuation and health of these territories. So just want to express my gratitude.
So our vision here at the Alzheimer Society is a world without Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And that world begins with a more dementia-friendly society where people affected by the disease are acknowledged, supported, and included. We ensure people affected by dementia are not alone, educating and mobilizing a broad community of care around them and supporting valuable research. Mobilizing that broad community of care is the reason that sessions like this are so important. We in Ontario and BC are part of a broader federation of Alzheimer societies, which means there are opportunities for you, coast to coast to coast, to engage with your local Alzheimer society for support.
And thank you for that, Cathy. And we wanted to share these quotes with you just to really underscore the reason why we're all here. So Cathy spoke to the broader vision, and these quotes really get to the heart of why we're here. And in fact, both of these quotes are from IG Wealth Management Walk for Alzheimer's honorees, which we can talk about a little bit to let you know what that all is about. But I just want to give a moment for us to be able to read these together. The education and help we're given is a blessing. The changes in my husband break my heart, but now in my home, there's peace. And another person shared, I knew it was a safe place. I knew I wasn't alone. I felt very comfortable at the first meeting, and hearing other people's stories, I thought, wow, I'm in the right place. That's really what we're all about. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what dementia is before we dive into some of the other details. We know right now that there are at least 600,000 people in Canada who are currently living with dementia, and that number is likely a low estimate because not everyone has a formal diagnosis, and not everyone who has a diagnosis is necessarily comfortable sharing it. There are many different types of dementia. Dementia is an umbrella term for any disease that causes physical changes in the brain, while Alzheimer's disease is a type of dementia. It's kind of like you can think of dementia as like the word food. You can have many different types of food. You can have things like roti, sherbet, roasted eggplant, or grilled lamb. It's all food. So grilled lamb is a specific type of food. Similarly, you can have many different types of dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, and Lewy body dementia. Sometimes people will have what's called mixed dementia. And this is when the person has more than one kind of dementia. For instance, Alzheimer's disease with Lewy body dementia. Dementia causes physical changes in the brain, and this causes changes in behavior, personality, and judgment. Different dementias cause different changes in the brain. And so that's why dementia affects each person differently. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, but I do want to underscore that dementia is not a normal part of aging. It's different than normal age-related memory loss. So for example, if we were all to live to be about 90 years old, about half of us would develop some kind of dementia. Many people live to be very old and don't ever develop dementia. And as I said, we'll talk a little bit more about the differences between normal age-related changes in the brain and changes that are not normal. They're not part of the normal process of aging. The other thing to understand is that dementia is progressive and non-reversible, which means it will get worse over time and it is eventually terminal. There are some medications that can help manage symptoms, but they won't work forever and they won't work for everyone. And there currently is no cure for dementia. So speaking of what dementia is not, we're going to go over some of those things right now. So for one, dementia is not strictly genetic. Genetics is often a question that comes up around Alzheimer's disease. Familial Alzheimer's disease, which is sometimes referred to as autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease, is genetic, but this accounts for less than 5% of all cases diagnosed. So keep that in mind, less than 5%. And this gene tends to cause young onset Alzheimer's disease, primarily diagnosed between the ages of 50 and 60 years old, but it can be earlier. Now, sometimes people are concerned about a family history of Alzheimer's disease or dementia, when in fact, they have a family history of dementia because of other causes, like heart disease or diabetes or high blood pressure. And this is why reducing our risk of these diseases also reduces our overall risk of developing dementia. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. I already mentioned this, but I'll say it again. Dementia is not a natural part of aging. I'll often hear people say, oh, well, everyone gets dementia if you live long enough. This is not true. Although age is the most significant risk factor for developing dementia, it is not natural to develop dementia as we get older. Dementia is caused by diseases that damage the brain. And while rare, we do see individuals in their 30s and 40s who develop dementia. So it's not true that this is an older person's disease. I mentioned this earlier, but it's also important to understand that dementia is not curable. I know that you may come across some claims out there that certain foods or supplements, vitamins, natural health products can prevent dementia or reverse the damage caused by dementia. However, at this point, there is no conclusive evidence from research to support these claims. So just some important things to keep in mind. Continuing on with this, dementia also does not mean the person will no longer have a meaningful life. And Cathy and I see this a lot in our work. There are many people living with dementia who continue to find meaning and joy and value in their lives. And we work with many advocates who are living with dementia who volunteer their time to advocate for the disease. Alzheimer Society of Ontario has a number of people who are wonderful, strong advocates who are also living with dementia. And similarly, the Alzheimer Society of B.C. is very fortunate to work with people who are living with dementia. People living with dementia have done things like advocated for a National Dementia Strategy, and they continue to share their stories publicly to challenge stigma. And these are just a few examples of how people living with dementia can stay engaged and, like I said, find value in their life. The other thing to understand is that dementia does not mean the person living with dementia will become aggressive. While some people with dementia do react or respond to triggers in ways that might seem aggressive, it's important to acknowledge that not everyone with dementia experiences this. And the more we can learn about the triggers of responsive behavior and how to adjust our own responses, the more likely our interactions will be positive. And then finally, this is really important. Dementia does not mean the person no longer understands what's going on around them. There are two language areas in the brain, one responsible for language in and one responsible for language out. Not everyone with dementia experiences damage in both areas. So they may be able to understand what's being said around them, even if they have trouble producing a response or speaking in response. But the main message here is that it's important not to talk about a person with dementia in front of them like they're not there. And there's also a huge value in nonverbal communication and touch that we should always be mindful of. So I'm going to turn it back over to Cathy now.
Thank you, Jen. So as Jen spoke to earlier, this dementia in Canada is a very significant problem already, and it's growing daily. So right now, nationally, we know that more than 600,000 people, Canadians, are living with dementia. And by 2030, which is only 16 years away, there will be nearly 1 million people in Canada living with dementia. Each hour, which is roughly about the time of this webinar, 15 people will be diagnosed with dementia across the country. And this number continues to grow. By 2050, there will be over 1.7 million people living with dementia in Canada. We also know that people who are of Asian origin, which includes members of the Ismaili community, will be even more impacted in the future than even today. Today, about 1 out of every 13 people living with dementia in Canada is of Asian origin. However, by 2050, that number will change to be 1 in 4. That means that dementia will become more common within your own community. As Jen mentioned, the symptoms that sometimes show up as part of dementia are not a normal part of aging. So it's really important to understand that there are some particular warning signs that you can be watching out for, either within yourself, friends, family, colleagues, etc., that are likely an indication that you might need to go and see somebody about it just to get further information to see what it is that you're dealing with. So these are the 10 probably most common warning signs of dementia. And I'll just go through each one and just provide a very brief example of what that might show up like in a person who may be starting to show some signs of dementia. So forgetting. So we often associate forgetting with dementia. Now, forgetting can happen to all of us when we have a little bit too much on our mind or we haven't written something down that we should have, and that can be normal. But forgetting things often or struggling to remember new things, that's the type of memory and forgetting that should be a little bit more worrisome and perhaps mean that you would want to get it checked out. Difficulty doing familiar tasks. So that could mean following a recipe that you've been using for years or remembering how to use your coffee maker to make a cup of coffee in the morning. So something that you've been doing for a very long time, very familiar, and when you start to have some difficulty understanding how to do that. Changes in language and communication, like forgetting words or using the wrong ones. As Jen mentioned, your language areas in the brain can be affected. And so the odd time of forgetting a word, again, that's not the type of changes we're looking about. We're talking about forgetting words more often and not even able to remember the word. There's times, obviously, when sometimes we think, oh, what is the word for something? And it's on the tip of our tongue and then it comes. If you cannot ever remember the word you're trying to think of, perhaps that might be an issue, or using the wrong word altogether. Getting lost in familiar places or frequently having trouble remembering what day it is. So, if you usually, walk from your home to your local coffee shop, and then eventually that becomes a bit more challenging, that perhaps you get, confused or muddled up on your way to the coffee shop, that may be a sign as well. Making poor or odd decisions. So this would be something outside of your normal. Some of us maybe are quirky all the time, but these are different kinds of behaviors. So perhaps it's wearing, today, for example, is a beautiful spring day, and perhaps you go out dressed all in a parka and a toque, and you're set for a blizzard. And conversely, if it's the winter and you find yourself outside in shorts and a t-shirt and your flip-flops. Problems with math or understanding what numbers and symbols mean could be an issue. So things like balancing your checkbook, something that you would normally have been able to do, but now it becomes a little bit more confusing. Misplacing things in strange places. I remember finding the milk at my grandpa's house in the cupboard. And you may also find car keys, for example, in the freezer. Changes in mood, personality, or behavior. And that means changes outside what would be considered normal for you and your normal functioning, or for your family member or friend. So this is, perhaps someone, is normally very cheerful and social, and they start to become more down, which could be considered depression, perhaps anxious, and withdrawing from social situations that they normally would have really enjoyed. Which is related to the next one, which is loss of interest in things that they would normally really enjoy. So if they've, been a very social person and love to go to, a family barbecue, and they no longer seem to be interested in that for a reason that you can't really pick out, could be a sign of dementia. And also problems with seeing things or judging distance. And this may show up as someone starting to trip, stumble, or fall more often than usual because they're having some difficulty understanding and judging distance. So again, as Jen talked about, there are, changes that happen in our brain and in our bodies that are normal parts of aging. And, the really important thing to think about when we're talking about dementia is how to tell the difference. And probably the most important is when you should actually seek some help to make sure that, what you're experiencing, it could be a normal part of aging, but that would be very reassuring to hear that. And also there are some other types of illnesses that can happen that can mimic dementia as well, that may very well be reversible. So very important to get things checked out if you're concerned at all. So for example, forgetting a conversation from a year ago, that might be a normal sign of aging. Forgetting a recent conversation, such as the one that you just had yesterday with a family member about something important that was coming up, that would be probably not considered a normal part of aging. Forgetting the name of someone that you don't know very well, normal. We meet lots of people and sometimes it doesn't register what their name is, but forgetting the name of a close family member or a friend, someone who has been perhaps part of your life for a long time, that would be a point of concern. Occasionally forgetting something that has happened also can be normal. Again, people are very busy, have lots on their mind. So there are times that you may not remember that something's happened. But often forgetting about something that's happened would be another warning sign that you might want to get things checked out. And again, as I mentioned earlier, having the occasional trouble remembering a word, but it's kind of on the tip of your tongue and perhaps it eventually comes and maybe others around you prompt you and the word comes to you, normal. But forgetting the words for things or using the wrong word frequently and things that are probably very familiar to you. So, as a simple example, you can't remember the word for bed, you're going to make the bed. And if you're having a really hard time coming up with the word bed, which is probably a word that's in our vocabulary quite a bit, that could also be considered not normal and a reason to get things checked out. So again, really important to reiterate that not all of these warning signs that I've just talked about mean that you have dementia. It could mean a lot of things. The important thing to realize is if you're starting to see these warning signs, to go and see a practitioner, ask to get a memory test to make sure, and at the very least, you get a baseline so that you understand where your brain function is right now and you can monitor for changes. And again, some of the symptoms I've talked about are not dementia specific. Some things can be reversed, so you don't want to leave it as a concern. So challenges facing people with dementia, and we see this every day, Jen and I, in our work, and that's a big reason of why the Alzheimer Society exists. So we know that living with dementia and supporting someone living with dementia can be really challenging sometimes. And so, of course, every family's experience with dementia is different. And so what I'm going to talk about now doesn't necessarily apply to everyone or perhaps doesn't apply in the same way, but these are some common themes that we see. One of them is shame and stigma. It's very sad, and hence why we're doing webinars like this one, that people sometimes feel ashamed or embarrassed of the diagnosis, or even, if it's within your family, you might be concerned taking your family member out because you might be worried about how they might behave in public. My grandma, who had dementia, she acted up quite a bit in ways that were outside how she normally would, and she could make quite a scene. And so, depending on who was taking her out, that could, cause some embarrassment or shame. And this shame and stigma can actually foster a sense of isolation and loneliness because people can become fearful of going out. Fear and grief are also very common and, of course, very understandable. People may fear and worry about what's coming next. As Jen said, it's progressive and it's non-reversible. So we may worry about the future and what that's going to look like for us. And grief, it's very sad for ourselves, if it's us who is living with dementia or a family member, to watch parts of a person change over time. Not knowing what to do or feeling really overwhelmed. This healthcare system is not an easy one to navigate. So getting a diagnosis of dementia and then not knowing really where to go next is something that we see quite a bit. Getting adequate support to live in the community. We know that people want to stay in the community as long as possible, if not forever. And so being able to access the types of supports that can allow and support people to do so can sometimes be quite difficult, which is why a dementia strategy is so important. And lastly, caregiver burnout. It's a 24/7 role to look after someone with dementia. And while can be a very joyful experience and quite funny, as I mentioned, my grandma, she did all kinds of things that were quite funny. It can be very challenging as well to not get a break, to have, some of the behaviors that may go with dementia be present. Answering questions repeatedly can cause caregiver burnout. So again, these are ways that the Alzheimer Society can support. So as I mentioned, the Alzheimer Society is coast to coast to coast. We have societies across the country. So no matter where you're joining in on this webinar, there is an Alzheimer Society near you that can help you. We offer a variety of different programs, and some of them include our First Link program, which is exactly that. We want all of you to remember the Alzheimer's Society as the first link if you're concerned about dementia or you have a diagnosis of dementia. We want you to come to us and we can help point you in the right direction. And some of the things that we do internally as well, we offer support groups in person and online, offered to people both with dementia and to their care partners as well. We provide education sessions similar to the one that you're listening into today on what is dementia? What should I do? How do I plan for the future? We offer social recreation programs that are actually really good for you as well, not only in terms of reducing isolation, but getting some exercise and making connections with others. And we have newsletters, bulletins, other information, our website, all of that as well. Also, if you become a client of the Alzheimer Society, one of the things that we do is we actually reach out to families on a proactive basis after you connect with us. So we check in with you periodically just to see how's it going. And hopefully we can do that in a way that prevents things getting too challenging for you on the home front. And if things are starting to change, we can perhaps make some suggestions about how we can help. So again, there are Alzheimer's societies everywhere. And of course, we're here today to talk about some specific initiatives that are happening within the Ismaili community, which you'll be hearing about momentarily.
So Cathy started to touch on this, but what we're going to do next is we're going to start to talk about what you can do, both in terms of reducing your risk of dementia, but also too how you can support people in your community who might be either living with the disease or supporting somebody who is. So the first thing that you can do to reduce your risk is to keep in mind that things that are healthy and good for your heart are also good for your brain. So for example, eating a rainbow of foods with lots of fruits and vegetables. When we say things like eating a rainbow, try to include fruits and vegetables of different colors, like eating leafy green vegetables, eggplant, peppers, tomatoes, lots of color, lots of fruits and veggies. Also, limit your salt and if you consume alcohol, your alcohol and your caffeine intake. That can help reduce your risk of dementia. And of course, if you smoke, stop. And ideally, don't smoke. And that'll help, again, reduce your risk of dementia. Make water your drink of choice rather than, for example, drinking things like soda or pop. That's also really good and healthy for your brain as well as your heart. And then, of course, move your body. You should aim to get about 150 minutes of exercise a week. And that means doing an activity that makes you breathe a little faster, gets your heart pumping a little harder. It doesn't have to be all at once. Even little 10-minute sessions can be really helpful. Other things that you can do to reduce your risk of dementia is staying connected socially. Cathy talked about this, how important it is to have that social connection. It also reduces your risk of developing dementia. And as a great example of that, and this is a picture from a group of volunteers at an Alzheimer Society of B.C. event, volunteering is a great way to stay connected in your community. Other things that you can do is protect your head. So wear a helmet, for example, when you're riding a bike or if you're skating or skiing. Get your hearing checked and protect your hearing. And if you need it, get hearing aids because protecting your hearing or preserving your hearing has been shown to reduce your risk of developing dementia later. Also, get enough sleep. Now, for most adults, that means about 7 to 8 or 9 hours a day, but you'll know if you're getting enough quality sleep if you wake up feeling rested. If you have trouble waking up, that's usually a sign that you're not getting enough quality sleep. And then finally, engaging your brain in things that challenge you and make you think. So for example, you could take a class, you could learn another language, you could play card games or board games, you could learn a new recipe, play a musical instrument, sing in a choir. Basically, anything that gets you thinking is helpful. And then finally, you can also play a big role in helping to reduce the shame and the stigma that People affected by dementia often experience it, and Cathy referred to this earlier when we talked about things that can push people to withdraw and become isolated. You can help bring them out. And this includes doing things like including people who are living with dementia in your activities. Even if it's a small gesture, like letting people know they're welcome and that there's nothing to be embarrassed about, that can make a huge difference. Showing understanding and supporting families who are dealing with dementia can also be incredibly helpful. Just let them know that you're here and let them know how you can help in any way. And also educating yourself. So learning about dementia, like what we're talking about here on this webinar now, learning how to talk with someone who lives with dementia, learning how to make your community spaces inclusive and welcoming for people living with dementia. There are a lot of great resources available. But basically, the key thing to understand here is that you have a role to play in creating a community that is welcoming for people and families who are affected by dementia.
So as Jen just said, staying connected and active is so important. And one of the places where you never have to worry about fitting in and being worried or embarrassed is the Alzheimer Society. And so we, as we've mentioned a few times, we have Alzheimer societies across the country. So wherever you are, there's one nearby that offer a range of programs and services, education, and frankly, opportunities to connect with others and have a lot of fun. If you come to an Alzheimer Society program, the first thing you're probably going to notice is there's a lot of laughter and good times, and there's usually some pretty good food as well. So please do check out the website. The links are going to be made available to you so that you can find the Alzheimer Society close to you. So thank you again on behalf of Jen and I for inviting us to participate. This is a little picture. We have just held our annual Walk for Alzheimer's across the country. It's our biggest fundraising event of the year where communities come together to raise funds, get together, connect, and have a really good time to support the types of programs that I'm talking about today. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, and I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Cathy and Jen, for the wonderful presentation and talking us through about the signs to look out for and the risk reduction strategies, and also highlighting the wonderful work that the Alzheimer Society are doing throughout Canada. So thank you once again for your presentation. Moving on, I'm very happy to introduce to you to our next panelist, Rahima Amiri. Rahima is a primary caregiver to her father, who has been living with dementia for the past 6 years. Professionally, Rahima holds a finance degree from the UBC Sauder School of Business and is currently employed by BC Hydro. Rahima is also a published author and is currently writing a book about her experience as a caregiver to help other caregivers in their caregiving journeys. So over to you, Rahima.
Yalimadat, thank you so much, Saima, for the generous introduction. Today we gathered to dive into one of the most challenging topics facing humanity, a topic that has touched the lives of millions around the globe, and that's dementia. It is something that is not only alters the lives of those directly affected by, but also ripples through families and communities. And for me, as a caregiver for my father, who has been living with the dementia for the past 6 years, I feel compelled to share my journey with the Jamat. And it is the power of our storytelling that keeps us strong, going, and knowing the fact that we are not alone in this journey. Personally, it has been very difficult path, not only for me as being as the primary caregiver for my father, but for my entire siblings, particularly witnessing the gradual loss of our beloved father's sense of self. This journey, seeing him progressively sinking into dementia, was the most difficult experience in our lives. And often I comparing this experience to the hardships we faced during the Afghanistan war. And I must admit that caring for my dad has been even more emotionally taxing. Because unlike the war, there were hope for the better tomorrow persisted. But with dementia, there has been always an emotional realization that my dad will never return to his former mental state. And in my experience today, I really want to highlight the four key insights that have been very important for me. First, understanding dementia is very important. Dementia isn't merely a disease, it is a condition that profoundly alters one's cognitive abilities and behaviors. And we, as caregiver for our loved one who affected by this condition, we need to understand their role. We need to know what they're going through on a daily basis. There are various types of dementia, as we heard from Jennifer, and and for my dad, it is very interesting to know that at times, often his memory bounces back for a very short time. He kind of like returns to himself, asking cognitive questions and remembering even his past memories. But we also know that it happens spontaneously without even triggering by any certain stimuli or any events. But we also understand that the next would be for us that would ask so many repeated questions, and we will try to acknowledge him and accommodate him as much as possible. And for me, knowing more about the dementia has really helped me understand how to accommodate my dad's dynamic circumstances and his changing behavior. And based on my personal experience, gaining knowledge about dementia has helped me also that I can serve him better based on his unique needs. And the second point that I really want to convey is that promoting mental health awareness is very important. Open dialogue about mental health is very, very important. And it is crucial for both individuals affected by dementia and their caregivers to seek supports and assistance. And by fostering open conversation, we collectively can address the challenges posed by dementia. And most importantly, is the stigma surrounding mental health issues. And I have to admit that unfortunately, mental health stigma still persists in many cultures, including my culture as Afghan. And the third point that I really want to share is my lesson learned. First of all, caring for someone with dementia requires immense strength and resilience, because witnessing the decline of a loved one's ability is emotionally draining. And at the same time, it is requiring qualities of kindness, compassion, empathy from caregivers. So, and providing quality of physical and emotional support becomes so important, because individuals with dementia often experience heightened insecurities and anxiety. And what really helped me as a caregiver maintaining my dad's satisfaction is for me to be around him and assuring him that he is safe, that he is secure, and that he is in good hands. Although he doesn't remember us as his children at this point, we keep reminding him that his children are around him to protect him and to serve him. He does often worries about his place, like Shebina said. He always asks he's going back to his home. He also worries about his food, clothes, money, belonging, everything that he has. And for example, when I bring him food in the morning or in the evening, he asks me about the price, and I'm asking him back why this is the case, and his answer would be, "I make sure that I afford the cost of the food." it is difficult. And for me to keep assuring him that he has enough food, enough money, profoundly helps him calm down. And that also helped me have a peace of mind, because dealing with someone with dementia, that when it's, especially when they're anxious and agitated is very difficult. So from me, the bottom line is that if the person with dementia is happy, the caregiver is happy too. And one last thing that I really want to share on this point is that people with dementia always refuse. For example, taking bath, their medication, going for walk, or changing clothes, etc. In that situation, there is no way for me as a caregiver try to make him understand. I understand that this creates nothing but a huge frustration, both to myself and my dad, as someone living with dementia. And as a caregiver, I highly recommend to other my fellow caregivers, give that person time. Their mood change quickly. But if they become upset, that doesn't change very quickly. In fact, that stays in their back of mind the entire time, even though they don't remember exactly what was going on. The other point, the last point that I really want to share is caregiver self-care for caregivers. It is very important for caregivers to prioritize their own well-being, seeking emotional supports from families and from friends, dedicating time to maintain mental health, and acknowledging personal limitation are essential steps in preventing caregiver burnout. And in my own journey, I did reach a turning point when I realized the importance of balance. And it did happen when, after pandemic, one day I was in Jamat and I was hearing the terms balance in the Farman, and that kind of like clicked in my mind. And despite the challenging that I was facing, I found comfort in nurturing my own happiness and well-being. And by embracing joy and finding moments of respite amongst the chaos, I also discovered that I could care a better care for my father. And in closing, in closing, at the I urge my fellow caregivers to, again, prioritize balance in their lives. While it is so natural for us to amplify moments of joy, as well as grief during the times of hardship, maintaining equilibrium is very essential for very own mental health. When the hardship hit us, instead of isolating ourselves and exaggerating our suffering, it is so important to find ways balancing out with finding happiness, be it is spiritual meditation, socializing with family, friends, even like partying, whatever that provides you with a moment of happiness and content, it's very important. And last but not least, by embracing balance, we can navigate the complexities of caregiver with grace and resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahima, for sharing your experience with us, your journey, your father's journey, as well as imploring all other caregivers to strike a balance in their life, and sharing the lessons that you have learned in your journey so far. So thank you once again. This is really valuable. It is now my pleasure to introduce Shebina Amlani. Shebina is a caregiver to her mom, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2010. Shebina is a senior specialist in cancer prevention at the Canadian Cancer Society. She completed her undergrad in health studies at University of Waterloo, postgrad courses at University of Toronto and University of Dundee, Scotland. Today, she will share with us her experience as a caregiver to her mom. Welcome, Shebina.
Thank you very much, Saima, for the lovely introduction. Yalimadat, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here to talk with you a bit about my own personal journey as a caregiver to my mom, Mrs. Shabanu Amlani. My mom is 85 years old, and she was diagnosed with early signs of dementia in about 2009, 2010. Mom was a chef at University of Waterloo. She worked at a college there at Renaissance College, care of 350 students, a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Very active woman in the community, IV volunteer, Ghusl committee, Randan committee. She looked after new moms postpartum when they needed their katlu and the baby massages. And she was also mom and dad were also people who took university students to Jamat Khana from Waterloo, as well as cooked for university students very regularly. So in about 2010, we began to see that there were some signs of forgetfulness that mom had. Just small little things. And it would be, for example, double salting food, or even things like not remembering where in Jamat Khana she left her purse or her shawl. So it became kind of a routine that mom would leave home with a shawl and a purse for Jamat Khana. And when she was coming back, she wouldn't know where her shawl was or where her purse was. And dad would be so frustrated because this used to happen day in and day out. And so sometimes she would misplace her gold. So she would be dressing for Jamat Khana and she'd have her gold, and then she'd go and put it away somewhere and then say, oh my God, where's my chain? Or where's my ring? And so these kinds of things sort of progressively increased. Dad was an amazing caregiver, and he was the principal caregiver for my mom for 10 years. But during 2020, during the pandemic, he passed away. And I don't think that we had any idea of how difficult dad's life was as mom's journey was progressing until we, my three sisters and myself, became caregivers very suddenly in 2020. And dad had his own health issues, but we were not expecting that during COVID, when he would go into the hospital for what was congestive heart failure, that he would suddenly pass away. And that is exactly the time that our eyes are opened to see what it is that dad did day in and day out for mom. I used to live in Kuwait. My older sister lives in Dallas. I have another sister living in British Columbia, and I have one sister living in Toronto. And so very quickly, these daughters that were living in different parts of the world and Canada had to come together to see how we could best look after our mom. And so as of 2020, my three sisters and I are the primary caregivers. And it has been quite a learning journey. But I have to say that as a Jamaat, I think we, over time, are becoming more open and need to become further more open. Because when my mom was diagnosed in 2010, and I asked some of the doctors, in Jamat Khana to please sit down and talk to dad, to please let him know that this was a progressive illness. This was nothing like acting out on the part of mom or being difficult or purposefully wanting to be this way, right? With mood changes and personality change. And she was not the person that we all knew her to be, which was such a gentle, caring person who was so amicable and loving. and the first person to put up her hand and wanting to help. And now it was like we couldn't, Dad had a hard time taking her to Kane because she would be like, "You're driving too fast. Slow down, Are you trying to get me, are you trying to get into an accident?" Or it would be things like, "Who are you talking to?" There were suspicions. She was suspicious about his activities and where are you going and what are you doing and why was that lady talking to you? And very, very unusual kind of personality, mood changes, and behavior changes. What was really, really hard is as the disease progressed, Mom wanted to go home. And she kept saying, "Please take me home. I just want to go home." And we would try to console her and say, "Mom, but you are home." That was the home that she and my dad stayed in for 20 years. Like they were in that same condo. And what she wanted to was to go to her childhood home. And she would say, "Please take me to my mom and my dad." They left without even asking me. They didn't even tell me that they went. How could they do that to me? They just left me. So it was almost like a child feeling so abandoned. So those were the behaviors that were very, very hard to deal with because it was very difficult to console her. It's just like a 6 or 7-year-old or an 8-year-old child that just feels like suddenly her parents aren't going to come back. As difficult as it is to talk about it, I want the Jamat to know that the Alzheimer Society was absolutely amazing. But when we found them, because it took us a while until we figured out that what Mom had was Alzheimer's, the most common form of dementia. And so once we knew that, we tried to explain to my dad that we were not going to go to another specialist, that this was the diagnosis, and no, we cannot go to another specialist and another specialist, and that we're not going to be able to have a treatment or a medication that's going to make Mom come back. So I think this is a very wonderful and critical juncture in the history of the Jamat, because we are more open and we are talking about what is a lot of people are facing by themselves. And as Cathy and Jen said, there is a lot of stigma. And in a close community, a cultural community, to come out and admit to people that you have this illness, or to even bring the loved one to Jamat Khana and have everyone sort of recognize that that person isn't the same. They're talking out of line. They're talking out during the prayers. They may speak up. That took a lot of time for me and my sisters to come to terms with, because everyone knew Mom as, the go-getter who gets it done, the leader, the volunteer, the amazing cook, all of that. And now she was becoming different. Her personality had changed. She also had these scripted lines when she came to Kani, and she would just know how to, it was like a cover-up. So she would say, "Oh, it's been so long since we saw you. How are you?" And these scripted lines helped her cope with what was mental fog in her brain and not being able to understand what it was going on in her life. And she was so lost in her brain, but she scripted those lines. And there would be people who wouldn't know and said, "Well, we see each other in Kani every day. What do you mean you haven't seen each other? What are you talking about?" And so now she was being made to feel like she was crazy. And, so then she started not saying as much. But these are what we call coping techniques. When we know inside, and she knew inside, that something wasn't right, she would say in Gujarati, "Ho abi na aati." This is not. And there would be moments of lucidity, and she would know that this is not her. And then she would go back, So it was What we need in our Jamaat, first and foremost, is to be educated and aware. And then I would say we need to remember that we are not alone. We have each other. We have the pillar and the strength. We have Jamaat Khana. We have each other. We are a spiritual family. And then I want people to know that there are amazing organizations like the Alzheimer Society who should be the first place, and it's called First Link, to go to find out what is this disease, so that we can move closer to acceptance when we see all the changes that are going to happen. And as Cathy and Jen said, it is a progressive illness. So we know that some of this is going to get progressively worse. What we need to do is to be able to create a space in our heart, in our minds, in the community, where people with Alzheimer's or any form of dementia can feel welcome, can feel like there are people that they can meet and socialize with and connect with, and not feel ostracized or don't feel discriminated, even though we make space in certain parts of the Jamaat Khana where people with all disabilities can be seated and feel welcome, because their spiritual role is as important as their physical, their emotional, their social, you know? And so that is a very important consideration for all of us to remember. I feel that if there would be one message I would want to convey from today's webinar, that would be that you are not alone. That dementia happens in the Ismaili community as well. And that there are supports externally that we can avail, and there are supports internally. I'll also, at this juncture, talk about my journey as a caregiver, because I think the issue of caregiver burnout is really, really important. I think that myself and my sisters have tried our very best to, in a cooperative and a collaborative way, to work together. But I think we have to remember that everybody's point of view of what is enough is different. There are things that I feel as an older sister that perhaps my sisters that are younger may have a different idea about what those things are. So we have to come from a place when we are a family that everybody is doing the best that they can. And sometimes this kind of caregiving can actually rip you apart, because one family member is feeling like this person is doing so much and another is not doing enough. And I think when we all come together and we say we're all doing the best that we can to take care of our loved one, it's really important that we move to that acceptance phase and acceptance that we are all doing enough. The second important thing I would say is when family caregivers have to make the decision to take their loved one to long-term care or to any assistive care, that is absolutely okay. It should be absolutely okay that you took your mom or your parent or your loved one where you can leave them where they can be safer, where they can be looked after, where they can be supported to the best of your ability, because sometimes continuing to keep a loved one at home where it may not be safe, where the caregivers themselves get burnt out and can get their own health concerns. So that stigma about, oh, well, this just went through their mother in the nursing home. Can you imagine, all that the mother has done for them? And what did the girls do? They went and threw their mom in a nursing home. That stigma is so painful. You already feel so guilty. You already feel so stretched and overwhelmed. For you to come and have that additional burden of actually saying that, no, actually, we've got our mom in a nursing home right now. Us personally, my sisters and I are choosing to take care of our mom at home. It has been 15 years, and we do it 24/7 with support from paid caregivers and the community care access centers and the LINs. And we've been doing this for 4 years. It is absolutely been a joy to be there for our parents. But at the same time, it has not been easy on our family relationships, on our finances, on our working lives, on how we've showed up for our spouses or our children. And it's not uncommon for family members to feel like, Mom, you're never there. Or Mom, you were missing in action. This happened, that happened, but you're not there. Because after work, you go over to take care of Nani, and then we don't see you until 10 or 11. And so, like, I sometimes feel like, it's like weighing all the time what you're doing. Duty, obligation, but then you have duty and obligation to your children and your family. And I'm being very transparent and very honest and sharing with you my stories because it is a juggling act. But I just remember my mom. And I see how she must have taken care of her parents and her elders in showing up every day to the best of my ability, to the best of our ability, and getting support from those people who recognize me as a caregiver, who say, wow, I see you, Shebina, or I see you, Rosemin, I see you, Anar, we see you, and you're doing a good job. And having that positive reinforcement from people who say, please let me know how I can support you. What can I do? Let me sit with your mom. You go and have a coffee, or you go to a movie, or please go get a haircut, or do your grocery shopping. Those kinds of things, even if we may not take you up, is such a big gesture that you are being seen. And people are seeing that you're trying your absolute best. But caregiver burnout is a real thing. And although sometimes I feel that Dad passed away from congestive heart failure, I think the truth of the matter is that Dad passed away also from caregiver burnout. And it's a hard thing to say, but it's a real thing to say. So in conclusion, I'm very cognizant of my time. I want to say that please reach out to the Alzheimer Society. Please reach out to the Care for the Elderly. Please reach out to the supports that are available. And, you are not alone. And the Jamat is with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shebina. It was so inspiring to hear your story. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey and your mom's story with such honesty and openness. And I think we really take your message to heart that we are not alone in this. Thank you so much. This brings us to the end of our webinar. We will be having more programming in the future related to dementia education and awareness, so please look out for those. Hope this webinar was valuable, and we would encourage you to share the information presented with your family and friends. I would like to thank all our panelists for sharing your expertise and experience with us. A special thank you to Alzheimer Society of Ontario and BC for your partnership and support. Thank you to all the volunteers for putting this webinar together, and thank you to all of you for taking the time and joining us today to learn about this important topic. For more information, support, and resources, and to connect with your local Care for the Elderly member, please contact the Access line. Thank you, and Yali Madad.